Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The tense relationship between Iran and the West seems to be moving along two contradictory trajectories. While the U.S. administration has not budged from its official maximum pressure campaign against the Ayatollah regime, President Donald Trump has blessed an initiative by his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron to seek a diplomatic rapprochement. Which of the two options has a better chance of solving the crisis? To discuss this matter, we're joined here in the studio by Dr. Emily Landau, who is a senior research fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies. Hi. Welcome. I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren, and Mr. Meir Javedanfar, who is an Iran lecturer at IDC Herzliya. Welcome. Mr. Oren, give us an update on the latest developments pertaining to this topic.
Iran is two-faced, and the two faces of Iranian activities right now are Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif and the commander of the Revolutionary Guards Quds Force, Qasem Soleimani. Neither of them is the ultimate decision maker. This, of course, is the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. But both of them represent a different approach to the efforts to advance Iran's interests as the regime sees them. Zarif has been quite vocal in his efforts to persuade not only the Europeans, because he has been in Biarritz for the G7, but also in Scandinavia, in Britain, France, and Germany, but also went to Asia, to China and Japan and other places, in order to make the case for keeping the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action viable. And he has insisted that what Iran has been doing is still within the mechanism of what he calls remedy for the American action in withdrawing from the plan. Soleimani, at the same time, has been leading the attacks that Iran has been conducting in Iraq, from Tehran into Saudi Arabia and other places, and obviously the actions against Israel from Syria, as well as from Lebanon by Hezbollah. And the real issue is whether President Trump will try to woo Zarif, his boss, President Rouhani, and even Supreme Leader Khamenei during this coming General Assembly session of the United Nations in New York, or whether eventually the hardliners in the Trump administration will win the day and the collision between Iran and the United States will be inevitable.
Dr. Landau, when we're talking about Soleimani, Qasem Soleimani, the commander-in-chief of the Quds brigades of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, the one who pushes forward the military branch or the foreign operations of the Revolutionary Guards, and subsequently also the efforts by the Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif. My question is, are those two individuals participating in separate tactics of one strategy, or are those two strategies that are pursued by two separate individuals with contradictory visions of the way things should move forward?
I think they're two separate strategies. With regard to Iran's regional activities, what we've seen lately in the Persian Gulf and the things that have been done with regard to the Americans, to the Brits, that does have a connection to the nuclear issue, because Iran is lashing out, first of all, with regard to its violations of the JCPOA, and the second route is to directly try to challenge these powers in the Persian Gulf. But as far as its other activities in the region, this is sort of a separate strategy that we've been seeing for years. It's not something new. Iran has hegemonic aspirations for the Middle East. It wants to be the state that calls the shots in this region. The famous land bridge that everyone talks about, from Iran through Iraq, Syria, Lebanon to the Mediterranean Sea. And we see it playing out with the actions and policies that Iran is carrying out. We see it we've seen it over the past 2 to 3 years, especially in Syria. now Lebanon and Iraq have sort of joined the party as far as Israel is concerned. What Israel is concerned about mainly is Iran, of course, entrenching itself in Syria over the long term, and this issue of the precision-guided missiles, which Israel views as a real game changer. So that's sort of a separate strategy that's being pursued by Iran.
Mr. Javedanfar, I'd like actually to touch base on several years ago when the Iranian public went to the streets in protest of the regime, seeking regime change by peaceful means. Of course, the regime at the time, under the guidance and instruction of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, actually cracked down very harshly on those efforts by the Iranian public. The President at the time of the United States, Mr. Barack Obama, did not really provide the backing other than a few words and statements in order to support the Iranian people. He didn't provide any physical backing to those people who aspired to bring about the end of a regime that they view as tyrannical. Do you believe that the Iranian public, under the conditions that were back then, same international sanctions, even more pressure when we're talking about the various components that the Trump administration put in place, considering the fact that President Donald Trump is in office today, do you believe the Iranians are now more able, if you will, to go to the streets and protest for a change, that they believe this time the American leader will provide that support?
First of all, I don't think President Trump can do anything more than what was expected of President Obama. People said, why didn't President Obama come to the help of protesters in 2009? With what? With the US Air Force? Dropping dollar bills on the people of... it was a myth that, Obama did not stand with the people of Iran, because Obama could not stand with the people of Iran. And if he had said anything, it would have actually helped the Iranian regime portray the demonstrators as foreign agents. The fact that he didn't say anything in terms of support is what really shook the Iranian regime up, because the Iranian regime looked at it as a homegrown demonstration against its existence. Let's just say now there's going to be demonstrations. What is President Trump going to do? What can he do to help? Nothing. He could say, yes, I'm with the people of Iran. So what? What does that mean for the people who are going to be arrested and tortured and God knows what else? Look, I have not met any foreign visitor to Iran recently who has come back and said that people are happy. People are... The disgust of the corruption of the regime is increasing so much that even Mr. Khatami, who was between all these former regime officials and government officials, he's got better standing. He said that even I can't convince people to go and vote in the parliamentary elections of 2020. In March, people of Iran are supposed to go. So people are expecting, we want people to go and demonstrate to topple the regime, because for the state of Israel, there is no other cure for this regime other than overthrow. Israel tried to reach out to the regime, it didn't work. But people are very scared of the regime. People in Iran are very scared. This is a very, very, nasty regime. And the regime at the same time is scared of the people, which is also interesting. A woman takes off her hijab, she gets 24 years in prison. The regime is so scared that, if you just open a little bit of the window, then the flood will come in, the storm will come in. But at the same, are we witnessing people starting to form opposition? I don't know. But the anger towards this regime is unbelievable.
Mr. Oren?
Well, when you look back at the documents and memoirs regarding the swiftness of the fall of regimes, whose viability and tenacity were predicted only a few weeks or months before Ceausescu, and there are many other examples. You see diplomatic cables assuring Washington, for instance, no, this ruler is safely in place, including the Shah of Iran. before the fall. So only
Not just Washington, but also Moscow, if I can add. The Soviet KGB, which was very active in Iran, I'm looking at that as part of my PhD, they also had no clue that the Shah was going to be
indeed.
overthrown. Sorry.
So only in hindsight will we know if the opposition was starting to gel, and we'll have to know what the spark was, which led to the conflagration when it comes. However, there were some very interesting remarks by Foreign Minister Zarif late last month. He appeared in Stockholm and in other places. He said that, in an open forum, we believe that President Trump will be re-elected. Now, was it only a tactic? Does it reflect the true assessment in Tehran that they will have to deal with Trump for the next 5 years and not only through the next year until the elections? And what are the consequences of such an appraisal if it is true? Does it mean that they are now willing to deal more than they said a few months ago? Khamenei forbade them from entering any negotiations. They still demand to go back to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, but they are willing to talk about some annexes regarding ballistic missiles or regional activities. President Trump wouldn't have let President Macron bring Zarif to Biarritz, where there were quite lengthy discussions, not only between Macron and Zarif, but the French foreign minister, finance minister, their officials. Apparently, they have dealt with an offer which was reported a few days ago that France will get Iran some $15 billion, not out of its own pockets, to compensate for the oil which Iran was not able to sell because of the sanctions. And this will serve as a bridge on which they will then walk towards the new negotiations. Yep. Something is afoot, that's for sure.
That's for sure. Nevertheless, when we hear Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif in Moscow in the meeting with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov, he was quite adamant of praising China and Russia for coming to the aid and being partners in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. For the sake of our viewers, of course, it's the nuclear technical term for the nuclear deal with Iran. But at the same time, he emphasized that Europe wasn't doing enough and it wasn't fulfilling its obligations towards the agreement. Just a few days before that, it was 2 Fridays ago, the EU foreign ministers met in Helsinki, during which, among others, they also discussed the matter of maritime navigation in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf at large, as well as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Nevertheless, neither the German foreign minister nor the French foreign minister, compared to other foreign ministers, including the British counterpart, weren't willing to speak about this matter and rushed into the meeting before going to the press and divulging their opinions on this point. How do you see the European Union as a whole with regard to the Iranian issue? Is there unity there when we're talking about reintroducing the nuclear deal as an agreement that may be functional for a certain period of time?
Look, the basic message coming from the Europeans is save the deal, okay? And Iran's basic message, with a lot of the things they've been doing, including their breaches of the JCPOA, it's all a message to the Europeans. If you want to save the deal, you have to save us. You have to make sure that we get sanctions relief, and then we can see what we do about saving the deal. Look, I want to say something. First of all, the pressure campaign and negotiations, or the diplomatic initiative, these are not separate strategies. The pressure campaign, the aim of the pressure campaign is to go back to negotiations. So I think it's often misrepresented in the media as if Trump is now changing course by, being willing to fathom this idea of negotiations. No, the whole point of the pressure campaign is to get back to negotiations. So this isn't Trump shifting course. This is Trump on course. The other thing that I want to say is that we have to notice how the Iranians have manipulated the situation over the past months vis-a-vis the Europeans and vis-a-vis everyone, and they're dominating the narrative. Right now, the discussion is Iran getting money to come back to the JCPOA. Not talking about a new nuclear deal. It's now all about them coming back to the JCPOA. This is a huge win for Iran. They have lost nothing here. They started breaching the JCPOA, and now the dialogue is about how much money they're going to get in order to come back to the deal that they were already in, whereas the idea is to go to negotiations to get a better deal. And this is a narrative that not only the United States has to challenge, but the Europeans need to challenge. Just one more sentence. The Europeans, before the Iranians started breaching the deal, they said there will be consequences. We will put more sanctions on Iran if they begin to breach the deal. At the end of the day, the Iranians are breaching the deal, and the Europeans are offering them money to come back to the deal.
Mr. Javedanfar, to what degree are the Iranians incentivized to return to the negotiating table with the United States and the world at large, considering the fact that we hear Hassan Rouhani, we hear Khamenei, we hear all the various officials being quite adamant, saying we're not going to return to the negotiations with the Trump administration, and any negotiations are welcome as long as the Americans are not part of it?
You know, I don't know why. I think the way we're looking at this, this is like a three-legged horse. The argument that Iran is being incentivized, considering the fact that it was Trump who walked out of the deal in the first place. Now, it could be the Iranian regime, it could be Botswana government, it could be... When you have one side which was sticking to the deal and the other side unilaterally withdrew from it, it makes it difficult for the other side who sees itself as a victim not to respond. And this is one of the reasons why people such as myself, were against the Trump decision. As terrible as the regime is in Iran, as brutal as it is the regime in Iran, the view that now it should come back to the deal when it's America that's walked out of the deal unilaterally is unrealistic.
The Americans don't want them to return to the deal. They want them to renegotiate a new deal.
That's also unrealistic.
Nevertheless, under UN Security Council Resolution 2231, it was quite clear that the P5+1 was called upon to adopt the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in the same manner that the Iranians were called upon not to undergo any activities that are related to ballistic missiles and ballistic missile technology capable of carrying nuclear warheads.
But the ballistic missile issue, we've all agreed, we've discussed this so many times on this program, that it was ambiguous. Okay, it wasn't
but
as
it's
credible.
the same wording specifically about the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and that was the prelude for the Americans to say, you don't follow through on the ballistic missiles, we're not going to follow through on the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
That it wasn't a violation because, unfortunately, it was left ambiguous, unfortunately. In 2003, Iran broke the deal with the EU3, and then it was sanctions. Iran took actions which were contradictory, and the EU joined Bush to impose sanctions. In this case, unfortunately, it's the reverse. And we have to accept that fact.
So my question specifically about being
incentivized,
however,
it's the
regime right now, as you have already mentioned in your first answer to a previous question, is that the regime is right now in a very dire situation economically due to the crippling sanctions imposed by the United States. Are the leaders of the Ayatollah regime not concerned at this stage for their survival, and to what degree are they able to move forward in order to basically put the cards on the table and say, okay, we're willing to renegotiate, but the demand, of course, of withdrawing all the international sanctions, that's not something the Americans will agree to.
Look, Rouhani wants to negotiate. Zarif wants to negotiate. Rouhani said today, they don't translate everything he says from Farsi. Today he says, yes, I'm not going to negotiate unless the sanctions are removed. But what he said also in Farsi was that man ikhtiyar dast man is, which means I don't have authority over this issue. In double speak, it means this is not my decision, although I would like it to be different.
Down to the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
We in Israel have to ask the question, would the cancellation of the JCPOA at this moment serve our interest? No. So therefore, what those $15 billion, those credits that Iran is getting, is actually to our benefit.
I would like to hear first a response from Dr. Landau to this point.
Look, I don't think Iran wants to leave the JCPOA because the JCPOA is actually quite good for
But they're
Iran.
slowly withdrawing.
Wait a minute, Meir. They can't get a better deal. Notice that they are only making small violations because their message is not we want to leave the JCPOA. Their message is we want to scare the Europeans enough that they start really helping us get sanctions relief. They are not going to get a better deal than the JCPOA. So I would say the party that least wants to leave the deal is the Iranian party. So, thinking that Iran is so compliant because, they're staying with the deal and they could leave at any minute, they don't want to leave at any minute.
Iran is compliant because of the IAEA said.
Well, the compliance is a question, of course. And when I spoke to Olli Heinonen, who was the Deputy Secretary General,
anymore.
correct, he did indicate, however, specifically, being well rehearsed with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action and UN Security Council Resolution 2231, that the mechanisms in place did not provide verification for the ballistic missiles and other components in the agreement, something that the international community obviously had to discuss about.
I think an important question maybe to ask in one of your shows, or maybe in this show, is can Trump get a better deal? That's a crucial and the key question which needs to be discussed.
Mr. Oren, can Trump get a better deal?
Not during the next year or so, prior to the elections, because the Iranians, much like the rest of the world, will wait and see whether the Democratic nominee has a better chance of winning. And if Trump wins re-election in November, some 14, 15 months from now, they will reassess, of course. Now, let me bring back into the discussion General Soleimani. Because he is the only one, or let me put it another way, the nuclear basket is the only one in which he is not involved. All the rest, he is involved in the regional activities and the ballistic missiles, and all of the other activities are under his purview. Apparently, according to experts who deal with it, he doesn't have any part in real decision-making on the nuclear deal. However, he is now...
Who does? Abbas Araghchi or...
I've never heard of that one before.
It's very interesting.
Well, the Israeli government experts who deal with Iran absolve him from responsibility for that. But that is only to say that he is involved in all the rest, which brings them and perhaps us to the question of whether his removal from the scene will help or hurt Israel. And only recently this question was in some close conversation posed to one of Israel's ultimate decision makers, who will go unnamed here. And he quite facetiously said, well, in Israel, we don't do assassinations. And the question was phrased, is Soleimani a condemned man? Is there a death warrant on his head? And the person who answered it and had the authority to answer conveniently forgot the Khaled Mashal affair, which took place under Netanyahu, not to mention other assassinations under other prime ministers. But obviously, for Soleimani, it will be very, very risky. It will not be prudent at all to go out in the September sun in Baghdad, which he frequents, or in other places prior to the Israeli elections.
Very interesting indeed. Well, we're drawing near to the end of the program, so I'd like to give each and every one of you the ability and the time to analyze the near future. Dr. Landau, we'll start with you.
Let me just say one thing about the possible negotiation. A lot will depend on the negotiation strategy of the Trump administration. And here I think there is room for a lot of concern, because what we're hearing from President Trump is he kind of thinks that he can single-handedly deal with this in a very short period of time. If he just meets with Rouhani, he can get a deal. It's not going to work that way. And we don't have enough indication about what's going on in the Trump administration as far as preparation. And this is critical. A lot hinges on how they negotiate. And the other factor that will be very important in this regard is international unity. If the Europeans would be a little bit more on the side of the Americans in this negotiation, obviously that will help them negotiate better with the Iranians.
Mr. Javedanfar?
Hezbollah's precision-guided missiles are more dangerous than the Iranian nuclear bomb, simply because Hassan Nasrallah, unlike Khamenei, has said that he intends to attack the ammonia plant in Haifa and that he would target Dimona. So I think that deserves a lot more attention and a lot more of our resources. We shouldn't ignore the nuclear issue, but the precision missiles of Hezbollah are more dangerous than a nuclear bomb sitting in Tehran.
And do you believe that the Ayatollah regime will continue to persist in its efforts on a regional physical level as well as on the diplomatic sphere?
I think in terms of prioritizing between Iran in Lebanon, Iran in Syria, Iran in Iraq, if I were in the Israeli government, I would prioritize a hell of a lot more on this issue regarding the precision-guided missiles in Lebanon. This is infinitely more dangerous than what's happening in Syria and Iraq, and as I said, even more than a bomb sitting in a basement in Tehran.
Point well
I
made.
think that's what we're seeing, actually.
Mr. Oren?
Emily just now put two words in the same sentence, Trump and strategy, which hardly coexist. Now, President Trump is an astute politician.
I don't know if they hardly coexist. They might not be unveiled to the public.
That's true. As he said, he's a stable genius, perhaps. There is something there which we as simple people don't see. But be that as it may, President Trump is openly vying for a Nobel Peace Prize. If it could come from North Korea and his great friend Kim, fine. If it could come from the deal of the century in the Arab-Israeli conflict, fine. If not, he may try to go for it or for the appearance of an achievement on the Iranian front. And because it is only make-believe, he could say that he has made Iran knuckle under and he has won.
Secretary of Defense Esper indicated that in American understanding, the situation has not passed when we're talking about possibility of a military conflagration, but the situation has reached certain status quo.
Secretaries and national security advisors are dispensable. Only the president counts.
Well, this is all the time that we have for today, so I'd like to thank Dr. Emily Landau, Mr. Amir Oren, and Mr. Meir Javedanfar, and I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time.
You just watched TV7 Jerusalem Studio. We encourage you to pray for the challenges raised in today's program. If you were blessed by our production, please consider supporting TV7 Israel. The details of our respective bank accounts for donations from Europe and the United States appear on the screen. Your generosity allows us to continue to serve God's calling, to broadcast content that truly matters through TV7 Israel from Jerusalem.